and all of these demands that God places upon the people, that you have to perform these duties in order for you to get my approval, then what ends up happening in that system, which I make reference to as a law system, that we find that we can't live up to those demands, that we can't fulfill those commandments. Why? As James 2:10 says, if you keep the whole law but stumble at just one point, you're guilty of breaking all of it. Tell me that again in James 2:10. If you keep the whole law but stumble at just one point, you're guilty of breaking all of it. In other words, you don't get credit for pleasing God to the extent that you get his approval if you just keep 99% of what he requires. Jesus is the only one that was ever born under law, a reference to Galatians 4:4, that God sent his son born under law. Jesus as a Jew born under law is the only Jew to ever completely keep all the commandments of God. And the Jewish rabbis counted 613 laws that Moses gave the people. They forgot one, the one about honor your father and mother. It's interesting that that's the one they forgot. But 614 commandments. Jesus is the only one that ever fulfilled what God wanted in terms of complete obedience to everything required of God, everything commanded by God. Jesus is the only one that fulfilled it all. And you see, here's the beauty of it. Because I'm going to illustrate this just 1 second. I'm going to put this up on the board just for a moment, okay? Okay, I just mentioned Jesus, and I mentioned the fact that in Galatians 4:4, he's born under law, okay? So, here I go for this in Galatians 4:4. God sent his son, born of a woman, born under law, okay? And when I said a moment ago that Jesus is the only one that ever kept the whole law and didn't stumble at one point, is the only one that gets credit for keeping all of it, because he didn't fail even at one point in keeping the law, then when Jesus is judged on the system of law now, I'm going to make a stick figure that's going to represent Jesus as the Jew, okay? And I'm just going to make a reference here, Jesus as the Jew. When I put Jesus in this picture, under the judgment of law, I'll just see if I can sneak the word law up here so that we can get the idea that Jesus is under the judgment of the law. Jesus is the only one that deserves life. He's the only one that fulfills Galatians 3:12. I just want to make a quick reference now to Galatians 3:12, because at the end of this verse, there's a statement in Greek that refers to the man who did these things. In context of that verse, the things are the things required by the law. So the man who did these things required by the law will get life as a result of the things that he did. Well, Jesus is the only one in Galatians 3:12 that qualifies for the man who did these things, that gets the reward of life for his obedience. And so keep this in mind, that the only person that is going to be righteous and get God's approval and get God's blessing for performance is the one man Jesus. Just one man Jesus. He alone has God's approval, because he's alone judged by a law system, and the verdict is righteous. That's why Jesus resurrected. Jesus' very resurrection is proof of his obedience. He deserved life. Galatians 3:12. He did these things required by the law. He deserves to resurrect. Now, when you take the principle of law and you apply it to anyone other than Jesus, you end up getting this concept of shortcoming. The Greek word for sin, hamartia. I might even throw out what this would look like. Hamartia, often translated as sin, is a word that essentially means shortcoming. A word used in the ancient world for an archer that's aiming for a target, but he misses. He doesn't hit the bullseye. He misses the mark. It's the idea that you're trying, but you're failing. You're aiming for the target, but you're missing. And everyone other than Jesus is guilty of shortcoming. And all it takes is one act of disobedience, and you find yourself not right with God, not approved of by God, and worthy of death. So here's what you get. In summary, you get Jesus judged under the law system as righteous. You get the rest of people judged under that same law system as being worthy of death. Okay? And you want to consider that humanity before God, apart from Jesus, is destined to the grave. In other words, Genesis, way back here in Genesis chapter 3, essentially 19 and following, God pronounces the penalty upon Adam for one act of disobedience. And that is that he lives in this life feeling cursed because the ground won't produce the crop that is easy to obtain. Rather, by the sweat of your brow, you will labor in the field until it's time for you just to perish away and die, because God says you were made of dust, and to dust you will return. Why? Because he did not obey God. When God put him under a law, when did God put Adam under a law? In Genesis chapter 2, verse 17. Remember that? Genesis 2, 17. When God put Adam under a law, that there is a fruit that you're not allowed to eat. There's fruit from a forbidden fruit tree that is poison. If you eat that fruit, you're going to die as a result. Well, guess what? He committed the act of disobedience, and he ate the fruit, and he got the sentence of death, which was to feel alienated from God while he was living, and to feel like it was a hard life, and it was hard to get productivity from your labor because God cursed the ground. By the sweat of your brow, you'll have to eat from the ground. The ground will produce thorns and thistles, and it's going to be a hassle, but it's going to end up to the point where you'll eventually just die. You were made of dust, you'll go back to dust. So this is the penalty on Adam. Well, remember earlier when we had spoken about the principle of group identity? Remember when we had spoken about what I call group identity, meaning sometime you might see in the Bible an example of two or more individuals that make up one name, one identity, one group that is looked at as who you are. My daughter Kayla, who's present here tonight, and she might come up here in a moment, is a great example of what I mean by group identity. In fact, I think she is on her way. My wife Kelly and I, along with Kayla, we all represent one name. We're all BEW. B-E-W. I am, my wife is, my daughter is. So BEW, B-E-W, ends up being a group identity because there's 3 members, not just me as an individual, but I said a moment ago, anytime in the Bible you see 2 or more individuals as united to be considered one person, one name, one identity, I'm calling it group identity. And I'm saying that B-E-W, BEW, is one identity with 3 members to that personality. Bob, Kelly, Kayla. 3 members to that one identity, right? Well, I said that earlier about Abram, at the call of Abram, that God said in Genesis 12:2, I'll make you, Abram, into a great nation. I said a national identity means that when you have children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren and they have children to form a nation, that's all one